I need it. Let's go. The guy.
Well, we have Turks, Cenk Ana comparing with you guys. Lots of crazy news today. Kash, Patel, and Pete Hegseth versus Elon Musk. Fascinating. And some new updates on that. And then lots of changes at MSNBC. Reid is out. Other folks are in. There might be a reason you don't know about for those changes. So we're going to get to that as well. So tons of news here. Casper, let's get started.
Well, let's get started with some of the cracks that are now beginning to form within the Trump administration, especially having to do with Elon Musk and those who seem to disagree with him.
We have people that don't show up to work and nobody even knows if they work for the government. So by asking the question, tell us what you did this week, what he's doing is saying, are you actually working? And then if you don't answer, like you're sort of semi-fired or you're fired, because a lot of people are not answering because they don't even exist. They're trying to find, that's how badly various parts of our government were run by, and especially by this last group.
President Donald Trump took a moment to defend Elon Musk during a press conference with French President Emmanuel Macron. And that defense came in light of an email that Musk and Doge sent to federal workers, essentially demanding that they justify their positions and the work that they're doing in the federal government. And if they fail to do so, they will likely be terminated. Now, there's been some pushback among Trump cabinet officials in regard to what Elon Musk is doing, right, Cenk?
Yes, in fact, the pushback has resulted in something that just happened that kind of resolves the issue on fired or semi-fired, as Donald Trump just said. We'll get to that in a second.
So this all started over the weekend when Musk posted this on X. Consistent with President Donald Trump's instructions, all federal employees will shortly receive an email requesting to understand what they got done last week. Failure to respond will be taken as a resignation. I gotta say, this is the kind of corporate culture that makes everyone insane, usually in private sector jobs. And it's awesome that now it's being implemented in public sector jobs as well. Awesome micromanaging, but nonetheless, then an email was sent late Saturday by the Office of Personnel Management with the subject line, "What did you do last week?" In it, it reads, "Please reply to this email with approximately 5 bullets of what you accomplished last week and CC your manager," the email said. "Please do not send any classified information, links, or attachments." Now, federal workers were also told in that email to justify their jobs by midnight tonight, or risk getting fired. And so when someone responded to his post with an accusation that he's running the Twitter playbook on the government, Musk basically confirmed, yeah, that's basically what I'm doing. In fact, he argued, yeah, this works. Trump seems to agree with Elon Musk, as you heard in the video that we showed you earlier in this segment. In fact, Musk's post came hours after the president expressed that he wants Elon Musk to get even more aggressive with what he's doing. He wrote in a Truth Social post, all caps, "Elon is doing a great job, but I would like to see him get more aggressive. Remember, we have a country to save, but ultimately to make greater than ever before," and he ends it with MAGA. But not everyone agrees, and that includes top officials in several federal agencies and departments. We're talking about cabinet officials. We're talking about people who were nominated by Donald Trump, confirmed by the Senate. They're basically telling their employees, their staff in these federal agencies, don't respond to this email. I'll tell you who in just a moment. But Cenk, any thoughts so far?
Yeah, so breaking news, like I said in a sec here. But when we did the poll for this story, which is in the live chat, check it out now, vote if you can. We asked who's right, Kash Patel or Elon Musk, because Kash Patel was drawing the line here, and I'm curious about it for left wing, right wing. I mean, and I did a poll on it on X, and it's about 2/3 saying Kash Patel, and now Pete Hegseth, who joined him next, are right, and Elon Musk is wrong. It's not scientific, but it's just an interesting way of telling where folks are going. So, well, even though Trump sent that note saying, hey, be more aggressive, then Elon took that as a green light to do this type of thing, and he seemed to be backing him with that fired or semi-fired comment. By the way, how is anyone semi-fired? Okay, well, we'll maybe find out on another day, because the Office of Personnel and Management is called OPM, and they just came out with this. This afternoon, OPM, during a Chief Human Capital Officers Council's meeting, informed agencies that employee responses to the OPM email is voluntary. OPM also clarified that non-response to the email does not equate to a resignation. So apparently Elon walked back, and we will not be able to do this. And now, look, we're in the business of credit where credit is due. I did not have Kash Patel standing up to anyone and doing the right thing on any bingo card I have ever had in my life. But here, Kash Patel did the right thing. It led to a domino effect, and now Elon Musk has walked back on this absurd idea. And I'll tell you why I think it's absurd in a second. Go back to you, Anna.
So several officials have basically told their staff members to avoid responding to that email. That broke prior to what Cenk just described. So for instance, for now, please pause any response, a top Pentagon official told employees this weekend, adding that the Defense Department will conduct any review in accordance with its own procedures. Others who sent out similar messages, yes, include FBI Director Kash Patel, who wrote that FBI personnel may have received an email from OPM requesting information. The FBI, through the Office of the Director, is in charge of all of our review processes and will conduct reviews in accordance with FBI procedures. When and if further information is required, we will coordinate the responses. For now, please pause any responses. Other agencies telling their employees to essentially hold off on responding to Elon Musk's email included DNI Director Tulsi Gabbard, the State Department, National Security Agency, the Defense Information Systems Agency, the National Science Foundation, which is a division of the Air Force, the Director's Office of the Administrative Office of US Courts, which manages the federal judiciary staff, NASA, and the CDC. So several federal government agencies or top officials within these agencies told their staff, just hold off on responding to Elon Musk's message. Now, many agency leaders are tired of having to justify specific intricacies of agency policy and having to scramble to address unforeseen controversies raised by Musk, especially after the billionaire's so-called Department of Government Efficiency gained unprecedented access to government systems. There is an exception here, though, and that exception is RFK Jr., who is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. He told his staff to respond to Elon Musk's email. I'm unclear on whether they will continue to do so now that a directive has been issued by the Office of Personnel Management, basically telling people this is voluntary. But the Bulwark Sam Stein, prior to that breaking news story, obtained an email from HHS, again, with RFK Jr. ordering staff to essentially respond to Elon Musk's message, which is unfortunate to say the least. Now, I like the fact that there's dissent within the administration. I think that's a good thing. Up until now, Elon Musk has been able to basically act with absolutely no checks, no balances, no one to pump the brakes. And the thing that doesn't really inspire much confidence is the inaccurate statements he's posting on X day in and day out without providing receipts for it. And the fact that important employees, federal workers, had been fired and then had to be rehired, or their firing had been rescinded because it turns out, they have important roles like protecting our nuclear arsenal or working on the bird flu, which is of course wiping out birds and lowering our supply of eggs and things like that. And it's now also transferring over as an illness for humans. So there needs to be a better method moving forward in deciding or determining, where the waste actually is, because again, treating the federal government as if it's Twitter is not really the right way to go about it.
Yeah, so couldn't agree more. When he did this to Twitter, if you remember, there was a whole bunch of glitches. The site would go down for a while. You couldn't get response to this or that. And a lot of those glitches continue. And by the way, the thing that people don't talk much about is that when he did that, all sorts of terrible content got onto Twitter, including terrorist propaganda, child porn, etc. And they're like, less guardrails, so what? Okay, now that's your company. You want to do that, you want to devalue your company, that's your problem, not my problem, right? That's a private company. But when you do it in the government and people are worried about losing their social security checks, etc., that is not going to play well. The government is not the same as your private company. So, in fact, real quick, a couple of viewers here. Kelly K said, if Crazy Kash Patel is telling his employees not to follow this, it's gone too far. And so look, by the way, become a member either through the join button below or tyt.com and be part of this show and be part of the live polls too at 6 o'clock Eastern every day. Dirge wrote in, the real reason they wanted those emails is to scan them for words they don't like, such as diverse or women, so they know who to fire. By the way, there's some truth, potential truth to that, because Speaker Johnson was talking about how Elon Musk is running algorithms on the information he's getting on federal workers right now. Algorithms to do what? And probably to find words like diversity so they can fire anyone that's involved in it. It's insanity. So, and that's leading to these results. Good graphic 8, 58% of respondents are worried that programs like students, financial aid, and social security payments could face delays. So a lot of MAGA thinks that they're the entire country just because they won the election. No, that's 58% of the country saying, tap the brakes, we're super worried. 42% say that they support the advisory group, while 53% say they do not. So Doge is underwater. This is a Reuters Ipsos poll. And finally, 62% disagreed with the notion that the president is authorized to terminate federal employees who do not align with his views or agenda. About 23% said he should be entitled to make that decision. Super quick clarification there. It's one thing to have a political appointment. It's another thing to fire somebody at the post office because you don't agree with their political views. That ain't got nothing to do with anything. So the president gets to make political appointments. He doesn't get to randomly fire people who disagree with him.
And a lot of these firings are impacting individuals who voted for Donald Trump. A lot of individuals who are actually veterans. About 30% of the federal government workforce consists of veterans. And so it's easy to understand how these seemingly indiscriminate firings are leading to some souring, certainly on Elon Musk, but at this point, also in regard to Donald Trump and the performance he's putting out as president. Now, here to talk to us about this and a lot more that's going on in the federal government is Congressman Ro Khanna. Congressman Ro Khanna represents California's 17th district and has kind of taken a different approach from other elected Democratic lawmakers. He is reaching out to Republicans, specifically to Trump voters, and I think that's an interesting tactic here. Now, welcome, Congressman Khanna. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
So let me just start off by asking you, what the reaction has been from your fellow Democrats in regard to your strategy in reaching across the aisle to speak to individuals who voted for Donald Trump.
Well, I think they're intrigued. Look, the politicians don't need to be the protagonists in every story. I mean, having us give speeches in front of buildings, fine. But what we really need to know is who is being hurt and having them tell those stories. And the reality is you can't be pro-America and be against American workers. 99% of Americans work. And the story that should be told here is the betrayal. Someone who ran on patriotism and building up America and building up the deindustrialized parts of this country is now hurting voters who voted for him, who never expected that they and their families would be fired or laid off.
Yeah, so I want to get to that outreach because that's super interesting and smart. But first, Ro, you seem to have done the same thing that Bernie Sanders did, and I would argue that we did, but I want to ask you first rather than assuming it, where you seem to reach out and say, hey, if you do things that progressives agree with, like cutting the Pentagon, et cetera, happy to work with you. If you do things we disagree with, happy to fight you. Is that a fair and accurate description of what you and Bernie Sanders have done so far?
Totally fair description. I think I got criticized. Why are you saying that you may initially work with Doge? Because a lot of people recognize that there is wasteful government spending. There's an enormous amount of waste with Medicare Advantage. They defraud the government. There's waste with pharmaceuticals who bill Medicare at obnoxious rates. There's waste with Pentagon spending with 5 primes that have almost $1 trillion. And if there was a serious effort in a constitutional, law-abiding way to go after that, I would have worked on that, because my loyalty is to the American people, not to just my party. But what happened here is Musk didn't have any interest in the hard work and has instead gone about this with a sledgehammer, a lottery ball of firings in a totally dumb way. And that will, of course, be opposed. And my own view is we have more credibility if we acknowledge that there is waste and that we have a better way of actually tackling it than just reflexively opposing everything.
Yeah, so we're actually going to talk about Medicare Advantage later in this program. You're right, enormous waste there, enormous waste at the Pentagon, and we've always been against that as progressives. We want a government that actually serves the American people and not the donor class and not the bureaucracy. So, but what I'm curious about is, since there are so many different bubbles, Representative Khanna, I'm curious about the Democrats in Washington bubble, because so when we said something very, very similar to, almost identical to what you just said, we were met with a lot of backlash from portions of the left. But on the other hand, tons of people on the left and independents really liked it, because there's all these different bubbles, and everyone in every bubble thinks they're the only ones who are right and the only ones who exist, right? So since I don't know the Democrats in Washington anywhere near as well as you do, in that bubble, how was your strategy received?
It was probably frowned upon by people other than Bernie and Warren and a few others. And they said, well, Elon's on the red team. We just need to oppose Elon. And obviously people have been right to be very skeptical of how Doge has gone about it. And I famously, or not famously, but from Twitter point of view, infamously got into a fight with him, and he called me a dick. And I said, I'm not going to go along with things that are basically unconstitutional. But I believe I have more credibility with a lot of voters, Republican independent voters, saying that, because I've acknowledged that I'm open to cutting actual waste and to working in the interest of this country. On my New York Times op-ed, the biggest line that got quoted again and again, unfortunately, it wasn't any of my vision. It was simply the Democrats made a mistake by not acknowledging that the status quo is broken and people are righteously angry at the system. And I think if we just started with that, we'd have a lot more clarity.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of Democrats seem unwilling to even start with that, but we'll get to that in just a moment. I actually want to get you to answer some questions in regard to that interaction that you had with Elon Musk, in which he called you a Richard. Obviously, that's what you're referring to. So that was spurred from this criticism that you were getting for not being present for a House Oversight Committee vote that was seeking to subpoena Elon Musk in regard to his actions with the Department of Government Efficiency. Now, unfortunately, Republicans were able to block the subpoena of Elon Musk 20-19, and you weren't present, right? And so you had argued that you weren't present because you weren't informed about the vote. However, 3 Democrats, according to Politico, familiar with the run-up to the vote, who were granted anonymity, said Democrats were given a heads up about the maneuver to try to catch Republicans by surprise. Because of that prior notice and the congressman's ties to Elon Musk, they're referring to you there, the 3 Democrats accused you of making an intentional decision to miss the vote. How do you respond to that?
Well, so the story was corrected. I mean, the reporter had to basically delete a tweet and issue a correction, and they were all anonymous sources and exactly incorrect. And the reason is because we could call the vote at any time. I've called for having the vote again. The reality is that Connolly's staff tried to sneak a vote when 10 people were out, and their hope was to get it through. But there were 10 people who missed it. It wasn't just, it was 8 Republicans. There were me and Kwame Bafume. I came back and I said he should be subpoenaed. And I said, let's have the vote again to go on the record. the irony is Musk and Trump had no clue of what was going on. It's only when I tweeted out to Elon directly that it got their attention. And we can either have this performative stuff that doesn't go anywhere, or we can have people who actually know how to take on these folks.
Yeah, so I'm curious when you realized like they're not gonna do almost anything they promised, because I had that moment and I want to run it by you. I agree with you. The smart way to cut out the bureaucracy and the fraud, waste, and abuse is you do an analysis, not a 5-year analysis with committee after committee, but you take some period of time, 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, to do a real analysis to cut the fat rather than the muscle, as opposed to what you described as the dumb way a minute ago, which is come in with a blind hatchet, just cut things whether we think we need them or we don't need them. And to me, when they said, oh, we're gonna do the 8% cuts in defense for 5 years in a row, I was excited. Oh, that's terrific. That's exactly what we wanted. Now, of course, the devil's in the details and we'll see what they cut. But it's a great start. It's about $250 billion over 5 years. But then they said that money will not actually be cut. It will be redirected to other parts of the Pentagon.
Right.
And I was like, okay, so you don't mean any of this. That's to me where I thought, this is all smokes and mirrors.
Wait, let me add to that, because the House budget that Republicans are currently working on also allocates an additional 150, I believe, was it million or $1 billion?
It's got to be billion.
It's got to be billion. It's the Pentagon. Yeah, another $150 billion for the Pentagon. And so it's just, I feel like there's some tricky pizzicky behavior happening here with what Republicans are claiming they want to do and cutting the fat at the Pentagon. What are your thoughts?
Look, I'm the guy who gets booed every year. Literally, you could go on my Instagram and see it. 67 people on the House Armed Services Committee, and the vote is usually 66-1. And colleagues who like me on the armed services all often go, Khanna, vote yes, boo when I vote no. So I always was very skeptical that Donald Trump would actually be able to get cuts to the Pentagon through the Armed Services Committee, given the makeup of that committee. And this is partly why people like Bernie and I said, yes, Elon, if you want to try to take on this fight that some of us have been fighting for years, go for it, and we'll support you. Now, it is sad to me that they want to repurpose that money, and basically that's smoke and mirrors. But I will say this, by Donald Trump saying that the Pentagon should be cut, by Elon Musk saying that the Pentagon should be cut, by Trump saying that we should have a 50% cut if China and Russia agree, he's opened the space for progressives not to be scared of our own shadow and say, you know what, maybe we can be for these Pentagon cuts to invest in the American people. If Donald Trump can be saying it, why do we have to be out there doing what Kamala Harris did, standing with Liz Cheney and talking about higher Pentagon budgets? Why don't we actually take the populist position?
Amen. Yeah, yes, I totally agree with you on that. So, tomorrow you're scheduled to hold a Zoom call with individuals who have been fired from their federal jobs, but these individuals happen to be Trump voters. And so I love that you're doing that, because I think their stories matter, and approaching it from a place of empathy rather than pointing and laughing at them, I think is the right approach. But your approach, again, is so different from what I'm seeing from other members of the Democratic Party. And I've noticed that there's been this like uplifting of Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, who's very passionate. She's got a lot to say, but her messaging is very different from what you're trying to do. And I want to give you a quick example and then get your thoughts. Let's take a look.
We fail to realize how selfish people are. People go out and they vote in their own self-interest, right? And so you had all these racists that showed up and decided that they were gonna vote for the other races because they thought, hey, we are all the same. But the reality is that he is a rich racist, okay? And so when he decided that he was gonna look out for somebody, it was only gonna be other rich white guys, not the rest of y'all. So as you're losing your job, as you're losing your Medicaid, as you're losing your farm, you're feeling away because you're like, wait a minute, you were supposed to go after the others, not come after us.
So Congressman Khanna, just to give you my thoughts on all of this, I just feel that the Democrats have already had 8 straight years of that kind of messaging, and it has only pushed voters out of the Democratic Party. A lot of the people who voted for Trump this time around are either independent voters or people who were voting Democrat yesterday, right? Like people who voted for Joe Biden, for instance. So I feel that maybe referring to them all as racists isn't going to help the Democrats' cause. But I am curious what you think about it and whether or not there are any discussions happening, behind the scenes about what the Democrats plan to do moving forward to ensure that you guys have consistent messaging.
Well, look, I don't view this just as a messaging issue. I view this as, what do you believe about America? I believe this is an extraordinary country. I was born in Philadelphia. I grew up in Bucks County in the 1970s and 1980s. It was 99% white. I had coaches who believed in me. I had teachers who believed in me. I saw parts of Pennsylvania where my father worked in manufacturing hollowed out. I saw wealth concentrate in my district in Silicon Valley, $12 trillion of wealth in places like Johnstown, Pennsylvania, places like Alquippa, places like Warren, Ohio, totally deindustrialized. The economic inequality in this country skyrocket. And they're being deep concerned that the system is broken with offshoring corporations, with billionaires, and people wanted change. That's why they voted for Donald Trump. Now, does that mean that we have to deny that there was slavery in this country for 250 years and 100 years of Jim Crow? Of course not. But what we need to say is that fundamentally, this is a decent country. I believe that the people will be willing to vote for us if we have a compelling vision to make their life better and recognize the brokenness of the status quo. And that is not a messaging issue. That is what I believe about America. I believe the country started in 1776, not 1619, because the ideals that are defined in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence are what America stands for. And we ought to have this debate as Democrats, and we ought to say what we really believe about the country as opposed to just worrying about messaging.
Yeah, well said. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll double down on a couple of things, but it leads to a question. So I agree with you that asking Trump voters, hey, where did it go wrong for you and how did you get hurt by this administration, but in an empathetic way, is definitely the right way to go. So I noticed you're doing that, and there's like, you even got a Google Doc on your TikTok account where they could fill it out. I mean, I love it, it's great. And Jasmine Crockett's got a lot of fight in her, so I appreciate that. I think that direction is a little wrong, as we all just discussed here. So I don't want to put it on Jasmine Crockett, but there is a contingent there that says, no, let's just yell at them more. So that's a plan, not, in my opinion, not much of a plan. You have a clear plan that you outlined earlier, you and Bernie do, which is work with them if they actually do agree with us on anything and then fight them on things we disagree on. What I'm curious about is there a third plan? Because I don't see another plan. So does Democratic leadership, without naming names, but do they have one? Because the country hasn't seen it. What is their plan for how to deal with the Trump administration?
I think their plan is the plan that Democrats have gone through time and again, which is to point out, which is true, that a lot of these cuts are going to deeply hurt people. The Medicaid cuts, the cuts in people who keep our planes safe and prevent bird flu and keep our nuclear secrets safe and fund cancer research. Here's my problem with that. I actually believe it'll work for 2026 because I think for the first time, Trump's numbers are below the water on the economy. His entire first term, he didn't have his numbers low on the economy, below 50%. But for some reason, he decided that instead of being a Trump Republican, he's going to allow Elon Musk to become a Mitt Romney, Paul Ryan Republican on steroids. And he's seeing the consequences. Fine, so we get back the House. Maybe we even win the presidency by default. What is our vision? What is our vision just to continue to try to win by default because they go too far and then not have a governing majority in the House or the Senate where we're actually being able to address the legitimate anger of working class Americans of all races? Or are we going to try to do something meaningful with the power we will be handed? And that to me is the failure of leadership in the Democratic Party. We are just being tactical. We're hoping that they self-destruct. Fortunately, they're self-destructing, but there's not enough focus, as Bernie Sanders has, on a concrete vision going forward to solve the massive inequality and to understand that many people who voted for Trump were not just angry, they were justifiably angry.
All right, Representative Ro Khanna, good to see that there is at least one person who understands what's going on in the House of Representatives. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it, and good luck with the new project.
Thank you, Ro.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, we got to take a break, but when we come back, we've got a lot more news to get to, including a fascinating appointment for the FBI by Donald Trump, someone who doesn't have to be confirmed by the Senate. We'll tell you who he is and whether or not it's a good idea to appoint television celebrities for these important roles. We'll be right back. Don't miss it.
Yep, back on TYT. So interesting. I'm just reading these now. So I'm going to get to some of the earlier comments in a second, but I want to read you some of the comments from TYT.com on the interview, which all right. Irish Supreme writes, "Cenk Crockett is amazing. She wasn't taking a dig at voters. She was voicing the truth. Do not vilify one of our only fiery fighters." So I told you that I like the fight in her, but you're sorry, but you're factually incorrect. So she definitely said that the racist voters were voting for the racist white guy, the rich white guy who was racist. You can call Donald Trump any name you like. You can call politicians any name you like. And you can, by the way, you're a citizen, it's a free country. You can call their voters anything you like. And I've criticized their voters in the past. But calling all them racist is both not factual and definitely not helpful. We've got to win back votes. We've got to win them back. If you call all of them racist, that makes it much, much harder. Maybe you feel better, you get to vent, and I get it, where a lot of us are super angry about things. But I mean, later in the show, we're gonna show you a poll. 20% of Republicans do not wanna end DEI. I was kind of stunned by that. You know, I already know how diverse that 77 million people are, but still 20% don't want to end DEI. Very surprised. But now they're all racist. So just look, she did call the voters racist. I'm not telling you to hate Jasmine Crockett. I like Jasmine Crockett. So I just don't happen to agree with that approach. I think that approach is not the right way to go. Repcat, the political catboy, says, Ro Khanna, with respect, there's a lot of talk and not enough follow through. I hear you on, if you were saying during the Biden era, we had fights with Ro. He came on here and we yelled at him. He, defended himself, etc. On follow through when the Democrats were in charge and really needed to fight harder against Biden, right? So that history is there. Having said that, I don't know anyone who follows through more than Ro in Washington, along with Bernie. They actually go and do the hard fights when they get pushback. For example, you know that it was, do you remember that it was Ro and Bernie who pushed for $15 minimum wage at Amazon? And they got it, they won that fight. And then they got Amazon as an ally to fight for $15 minimum wage for other companies to go get it because they didn't want to be at a competitive disadvantage. He's done a lot of things where there was tons of follow through and he's doing it right here. So, discredit where discredit is due, and credit where credit is due. And right now, credit is definitely due, in my opinion, to Ro Khanna. You just heard him yourself. Chill Paradigm says, always happy to see elected officials on TYT. Not enough of them feel they need to speak to us.
Very true.
Oh, enormously true. That's why I have so much respect for Ro. He always comes and talks to people, whether it's a hostile environment, a friendly environment, he doesn't care. Whereas almost all of the other Democrats say, if you're not going to kiss my ass, I will never come on your show. And that's a disgusting attitude because it's saying, hey, I don't care about even our own voters. Who cares about our voters? The most important thing is to protect my own ego. That's not how you should.
That's not a leader. That's not what leaders do. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, back on TYT, Cenk Ana with you guys. A lot more news.
We got to talk about what's currently transpiring over at the FBI. There's a new Trump appointment, and you should know about it.
because this may be a little bit emotional, and let me apologize in advance. I'm going to accept the role proudly as the deputy director, the number 2 spot at the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Conservative media star and podcaster Dan Bongino has been appointed by Donald Trump to serve as deputy director of the FBI. Now, normally a veteran agent of the Bureau is chosen to serve in this role. However, that is not the case with this administration, which of course is approaching appointments and nominations in unconventional ways. Right, Cenk?
Definitely, I think that there's a reason why he picked Bongino. Well, there's actually 2 reasons. And the real question is which one of those 2 reasons, because one of them is disastrous and the other one is actually defensible. So we'll get to it.
Okay, so Donald Trump announced this on social media. Let's take a look. He basically wrote that, Dan Bongino is a man of incredible love and passion for our country, and he has just been named the next deputy director of the FBI. Trump then notes that Bongino previously worked for the New York Police Department and was a special agent with the US Secret Service. He also wrote this, another aspect of the life of Dan Bongino that I think is very important. He has a great wife, Paula, and 2 wonderful daughters who truly love their dad. What an incredible job Dan will do. Now, in the past, FBI directors, again, have been selected, senior agents with extensive experience. Bongino has not served any role in the FBI, does not have any FBI training or experience. But if you're wondering what his job entails, what his responsibilities would be, he would essentially serve as the FBI's second in command. Obviously, they are responsible for all FBI domestic and international investigations and intelligence activities. He would develop and implement the FBI's strategic priorities and policies and oversee the work of FBI executives, including assistant directors and special agents in charge. Lastly, they provide counsel. He would provide counsel and advice to the FBI director. In this case, of course, that would be Kash Patel, who was confirmed to serve in his role last week.
Yeah, so Dan Bongino is a fiery guy, and he's gotten into some big fights with Geraldo Rivera, Politico, media, you name it. Us, right?
Yep.
And I had a big debate with him before the election about Trump. That's not the issue that I care about. The issue I care about is this brother qualified for this exact job, right? Because this job usually goes to someone with a lot of management experience and who is normally an FBI agent. So Kash Patel and Dan Bongino have absolutely no experience with the FBI or how to manage the FBI. So yeah, Bongino was a cop once and he was in the Secret Service once, but that doesn't mean you know how to manage 38,000 employees with very specific tasks at the FBI, which you have no familiarity with. So my guess is just like if you put anyone in there that didn't have that experience, they'd be overwhelmed. Okay, now you're gonna take a talk show host and put them in there, and they might be extraordinary. And there's probably some that are amazing. I hope, okay, but for that job, that doesn't seem right. So why did Trump pick him? The 2 reasons I was alluding to earlier are, 1, he loves anyone who could make their case for him. He believes in messaging 200%, right? So messaging over substance. The Democrats apparently don't know that messaging exists, so they never do any messaging. So the Democrats way under message, and here Trump is emphasizing message to the detriment of actual competence or experience in this field. So I think that's a mistake, but I at least understand it. What I'm worried about, and what we should all be worried about, is that that's the secondary reason that Trump picked him, and the primary reason that he picked him is because he wants loyalists that are the head of the FBI and the second in charge. So if he gives an order that is illegal or unconstitutional, that they don't ask questions and they follow that order. And so have Kash Patel and Dan Bongino been loyalists of Trump? Absolutely, 200%, never question him. I don't know, maybe Dan's disagreed with him on some things, but I've never heard it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist if I didn't hear it, but it certainly hasn't been in the press. And so, but I don't know what's in his heart and his brain. Kash Patel's made it super clear. His only reason for existence is to do whatever Trump tells him to do. Although on the other hand, he just defied Elon Musk. And so that was super surprising.
That was beyond surprising because it's not just that Kash Patel defied Elon Musk. Donald Trump has consistently defended what Elon Musk has been up to with the Department of Government Efficiency and the firing of all these federal employees. So in pushing back against Elon Musk, Kash Patel is in a way pushing back against Donald Trump, who supports what Elon Musk is doing. Again, did not expect that to happen. And we'll see, when more contentious issues come up, what Kash Patel is willing to do.
Yeah, I'll tell you, this is really not. I'm going to tell you two things that are small. One is my experience and the silver lining. So when I debated him for an hour, I was expecting someone who was far more irrational.
Like foaming at the mouth.
Yeah, and crazed and conspiracy theories. And he has some, no question, okay, from our perspective. But it was a fine back and forth. You can go watch it on line somewhere, I presume. And so we totally disagreed, and he was totally for Trump, and I was against him, etc. But it was a more rational conversation than I expected. It gave me 1-2 couple of percent hope, right, that he's not just going to be a wild radical. We'll see, but that's tiny because I only had 1 hour of interaction with him. And then the tiny silver lining is, if Dan Bongino, I just can't have hope in Kash Patel. But if Dan Bongino says he will not execute an illegal or unconstitutional order, that would have a lot more weight with MAGA on the right wing. If some other random Republican or elected politician said, I'll stand up to Donald Trump, they're gonna get steamrolled. But if Bongino says, no, this is wrong, this is unconstitutional, I mean, it's very, very unlikely, very unlikely. But if he says it, that would have a lot of weight.
Wait, hold on. I want to understand why you think that. Why do you think that would have a lot of weight? And why would you think that Trump's most ardent defenders would side with Bongino and potentially agree with what Bongino is saying in pushing it back against something Donald Trump might want him to do that could be unconstitutional?
Okay, I'm actually surprised you're saying that. So let's take an example here. And again, remember, this is tiny, tiny silver lining, right? You have Representative Joe Blow, or pick a real one, Senator Tom Cotton, and he's put in as deputy director of the FBI, and he goes, I don't agree with Trump on this, and I'm gonna resign because of this, right? Everybody be like, in MAGA would be like, good riddance. Okay, don't let the door hit you on the way out. We don't care, you hold zero weight, right? If Bongino says it, or just fill in the blank for any other right-wing talk show host that they trust to some degree, Patrick Bet-David, I don't know, whoever, right? And they go, yeah, no, I came in loving Trump, and everybody knows that. But he gave me an order that's illegal or unconstitutional, so I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to resign. You don't think that would affect MAGA a lot more than a representative or a senator saying that?
Sure, yes, it would definitely be more persuasive than a standard Republican politician doing the same thing, right? I just think that oftentimes, and history is proof of this, whenever those clashes happen between Donald Trump and individuals that he himself appointed in his own administration, Trump somehow manages to get his base to side with him and turn on the individual who disagrees with him.
Yeah, so look, of course, because he's the leader, right? And so if Biden, and plus he's developed a cult of personality, of course, right? And it's a historic one. And so, and by that I don't mean like in a derisive way. I mean, people believe in him because they think that he's the first guy who ever fought back against the establishment. You disagree with that, but that's their earnest belief, right? So that's why they're so animated, like we were animated with Bernie, right? But if Bernie is like going up against like Richie Torres and Richie Torres is like, no, this is illegal, we should definitely help Israel more, right? And Bernie fires him, we're gonna side with Bernie, right?
Yeah.
But if it was, and again, name a fill in the blank, I don't know, Crystal Ball or someone that we like, trust, Ryan Grimm, David Sirota, and David Sirota comes in, you should check out The Lever, you should check out all the work that all those folks do, and says, Bernie's asking me to do something illegal or unconstitutional, I'm resigning. That would have a lot more weight with me.
Yeah, okay, I get what you're saying. Right. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, it really depends on whether or not the public, and in this case, Trump's base, trusts the individual and has some credibility, like that individual has to have some credibility with the base in order to have some chance of getting the base to side with them in doing the right thing and pushing back against Trump. So we'll see what happens. Look, it's difficult to comment on some of these controversial figures getting appointed for these roles because they haven't had a day in the job yet. So we'll see how he does. And obviously we'll fill you in as that story develops.
Yeah, actually, just last thing on that. Yeah, look, again, what we're talking about is a percentage of a percentage of a percentage. It's unlikely to happen in a lot of circumstances. What's way more likely to happen is how they execute the job. We're all gonna see that, right? And all the downsides and the upsides. So if you say, hey, I already hate Dan Bongino and I'm gonna judge everything he does as 100% wrong and I don't need to look at it, that's where I disagree, okay? Now, if he says or does things that are right, like Kash Patel just did, and we're shocked out of our minds, but we will say it is right, okay? Because it's our job to deliver the facts to you. If he does things that are wrong, which is, given the circumstance, very, very likely, then we'll come out and say what he did was absolutely wrong and explain why. That's how you should handle things, based on what they actually do rather than what we think of them ahead of time.
Well, when we come back from the break, we'll talk a little bit about where Donald Trump currently stands on the multiple polls that have come out recently about his job approval, how Americans are feeling about how he's carrying out certain elements of the presidency, including his response to immigration, the economy, and more. We've got that and more when we come back from the break. Don't miss it.
All right, back on TYT. This is wonderful variety of thought here. Let's go to Twitch. Octo Squiddy says MAGA is not half the country. Half the country of eligible adult voters didn't vote. Referring to MAGA as half the country is not only wrong factually, it dangerously implies they are more powerful than they actually are. Okay, I hear you. On the other hand, we're doing shorthand for the voters. So if I say half the country is Democrats, then you'd say, well, that's also wrong, because we don't know how half of the country is gonna vote. Maybe they're all right-wingers but didn't vote. Maybe, but we have to go with the people who voted. So that's the shorthand. Half of them are MAGA. Well, actually, that's not even true. Half the country voted for Trump. Not all the people who voted for Trump are MAGA. And so I've said this 1,000 times, but I really want you guys to absorb it, and we got a poll that proves it today, right? There are lots of disagreements in there. And there's lots of independents in there. There's lots of former Democrats in there. There's Republicans who aren't exactly MAGA. And what exactly is MAGA? On the Democratic side, tons of disagreements and diversity. Progressives in the establishment don't agree at all. The populists in the establishment hate each other. So I want you guys to keep an open mind so that, again, we could have the right strategy to win back those votes and to win elections so we could pass bills. Sonic Boom Dragon 23 says, Roe's a real patriot in my book. Fight the fascists from within the system. So that's an interesting point of view. 2, I like it. Natural Born Dragon says, I love Jasmine Crockett. A lot of folks too, because we've been thirsty for Democrats who fight back, right? We started a trend, I believe, of people on the left in media fighting back. Before the Young Turks, you couldn't find a Democrat or anyone on the left to fight back on cable news or anywhere else if your life depended on it, right? So that's mission accomplished. People on the left in media fight all the time now, right? Now, when you get to Washington, a lot less fighting them. So that's why Jasmine Crockett is an oasis sometimes. So I get the value of that, but we can still disagree on some strategy and some facts and tactics, etc. Okay, then let's go to YouTube members. Casey Hagas writes in, all billionaires must submit a list of 5 things they did for society, or it's the 1780s France. Okay, I don't agree with 1780s France, but it's a funny point in the beginning about, Elon saying, tell me the 5 things you did. Okay, tell me the 5 things you did for the American people. I know I can list you 500 things Elon Musk has done, and all those donors have done for themselves. So Ski Mayo writes in, or C Maschio, okay. Hey Cenk, I'm surprised you didn't think Kash had a spine. Honestly, if he didn't say crazy conspiracy theory stuff, I would have no problem with him. Brother, conspiracy theories, enemies list, and says he'll never disagree with Trump. That's why I think that. But hey, again, we always do credit where credit's due. And way to stand up to Elon Musk on that one. Seventh Fire Stephanie says, our government is nothing but a play toy to Trump and Musk, surely surreal. And to that point, imagine if Biden came in and said, okay, George Soros now is running a program that starts with SOROS. It's called Soros, and he runs the entire government and will be able to fire anyone he likes. Why? Because he's my top donor. Everybody's heads would pop off. And that's exactly what Elon Musk is doing. So you're right that they're using it like a play toy. Cyber Dragon says, Roe needs a little more oomph. He's on the right track, but people like Jasmine steal all the thunder, pushing the wrong message. By the way, again, Jasmine doesn't push the wrong message all the time. We just don't happen to agree with that one. All right, I love the diversity of opinion. That's the Young Turks. We'll be right back. Back on TYT, Cenk Ana, more news.
Let's talk about how Americans are feeling about President Donald Trump's performance thus far.
51% of Americans think the mass firings of federal employees have gone too far. And more than half of Americans think Trump is overusing his executive powers. So with all these firings and executive actions, is voter enthusiasm for President Trump changing?
You might notice there's a lot of red on the screen and a lot of negatives. Trump is underwater in all these polls. His net approval rating, look at this, -5 points in the CNN poll, -6 points in Gallup, -7 points in Ipsos, -4 points in Quinnipiac, negative, 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 and then negative.
Several new polls evaluating President Donald Trump's performance among the American people are out today, and it does appear that the honeymoon is somewhat over for Trump. Even Republicans are really split on how Trump is handling one issue in particular, right, Cenk?
Yeah, and I am actually shocked by it, so I can't wait to get to that. And on one issue, he's nearly unpopular with Republicans.
With Republicans, yes.
So this poll was super interesting, but there's a new poll that also has Trump at relatively popular. So there's lots of twists and turns here, but it's really important so you see the diversity of opinion within the country and apparently even within Trump voters.
So we're gonna get into the details of two separate polls just to juxtapose them and the results. The first one being the Reuters Ipsos poll that was out today. Now, according to this poll, Americans think that Donald Trump's first month in office is a mixed bag overall. For instance, here are the key takeaways from the Reuters Ipsos poll. Only 25% of respondents support the United States taking over the Gaza Strip in the Middle East. And by the way, that actually does include 50% of Republican voters. Also, so let's take a look at that. All right, so this gives you the results of the respondents in regard to resettling Palestinians, AKA ethnic cleansing, and essentially the US government taking over Gaza. Among all Americans, only 25% are in favor, 68% are against. 50% of Republicans are in favor, while 46% are against. You look at Democrats, only 9% are in favor, 88% against, and individuals who identify as other, meaning independents, non-affiliated voters. Among those, 19% support the idea of taking over Gaza. Cenk.
Yeah, real quick on this one, because this one's so important. Told you on several grounds, it's deeply unpopular to support Israel on Gaza. Only 25% of the country agrees. But yet Joe Biden and Kamala Harris walk that plank anyway. Now Donald Trump is in the middle of walking that plank. And Donald Trump, unlike the Democrats, loves to be popular. But yet he's willing to be unpopular if you give him $337 million as the Adelson family has, let alone all the money from AIPAC, et cetera. Second of all, told you independents hate the idea of financing this genocide. Down at 19%. I mean, what Biden and Kamala Harris did was political malpractice to not change their position on that just for their donors' sake. Now the political malpractice is on Trump. Finally, the told you is, I told you that the right-wing voters didn't want to go into Gaza and put boots on the ground. And there's half of them going, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
No, we don't want to do that.
In fact, Reuters spoke to one Republican lawyer, his name's Willard Moore, and I thought his quote was interesting. He says, "I thought that," meaning taking over Gaza, "was a moronic idea because it's infeasible. If you did it, it would cost a lot of money, and at the end, what would you have? Some sort of resort? Like, what good is that for anyone?"
Yep.
I love that comment, and obviously it would be insanely cruel to displace millions of Palestinians who have the right to that land. But going back to the Reuters Ipsos poll, obviously the respondents were asked about other areas of the Trump administration thus far. Now, only 32% approve of Trump's handling of inflation, which, look, I get it. The data that we recently delved into in regard to inflation being stickier, unfortunately going up a little bit in recent months, relied on data from January. So it's easy to misrepresent that and put that on Trump. But look, it's, in my opinion, it's too early to judge him too harshly on how he's handling inflation. With that said, though, he has been, lowering expectations in regard to lowering inflation in recent weeks, through interviews, through posts on social media. It's almost as if he wanted to run on the issue, but now that he's in power, doesn't really want to focus on lowering inflation and following through on that specific promise.
To which I say, of course. And so this goes to, the inflation issue goes to back to the bubbles. So in the Democratic bubble pre-election, what do you mean? We have a great economy. The stock market's up, unemployment is low. Yeah, inflation is a little bit of a problem. And we're like, yeah, maybe it's a little bit of a problem if you're super rich and live in Washington, but it's a massive problem in the rest of the country. And if you ignore it, you'll run right into that brick wall, and that's what happened. So now in the Republican bubble, they're like, oh, it's okay. The country loves Doge and they want to do all these cuts and everything's going great. So it's handling inflation is not that big a deal. And the American people are like, no, I don't know what it's gonna take to get through your thick heads, all of you guys on the Democratic and Republican side. It's a big deal because that affects our lives more than anything else. I just went to go buy eggs and I was like, God damn it, right? That's what normal people go through when they go shopping. And now Trump is pulling a Biden on that, and it's going to be a disaster for him. And guys, the other part of the problem is they don't actually have a plan to help any Americans. They have a plan for trillions in tax cuts. They never had a plan to lower inflation. That's the core of the problem.
I want to go to graphic 4 so we can discuss what the Reuters Ipsos poll found on Americans' approval of Doge. And as you can see by the numbers here, well, a lot of Americans not in favor of it. Among all adults, only 42% are in favor of what the Department of Government Efficiency is up to. 53% disapprove. Republicans obviously find it a lot more appealing. So 82% of Republicans approve of what Doge is doing, only 16% disapprove. 9% of Democrats approve, while 90% of Democrats disapprove. And in the other category, you have 38% of respondents saying that they approve of what Doge is doing. So vast majority of Democrats against it, vast majority of Republicans in favor of it. What really might make the difference for someone like Donald Trump is whether the independent voters and their distaste for what's happening in regard to Doge ends up lowering his approval rating overall.
I'll make a quick prediction on that. That number is already low at 42%. Independents 38% is a really bad number. It's so, hey, is it going to recover? And by the way, we have a poll in the live chat, shows live 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern every day, Monday through Friday. And we're asking if Trump's numbers are going to go up or not. In the case of Doge, my bold prediction is they will only go down. They will not come back up. Because what's going to happen next is you're going to hear more and more stories of how dumb these cuts were. I don't mean making any cuts is dumb. There's actually a ton of waste in the government. I mean, the way they did this, a blind hatchet. Oh, let's just chop things off. And who cares if they're veterans? Who cares if they're working on cancer research? Who cares on how we do? And they're gonna, by the way, and that's in a good case scenario. In a bad case scenario, they really screw something up and they don't send Medicaid payments or something. And then you're gonna have that number in the teens. So it's not gonna ever recover because they're doing it in a way that's reckless.
It's reckless in that they're just kind of wiping out federal workers who are on probation. So probationary federal workers, they're usually on probation for about 2 years. And so the idea is these are brand new federal workers. Do we really need them anyway? But also keep in mind that federal workers who are promoted are on probation in their new position. And think about it, they've been promoted, meaning they've done a good job and there was reason for them to be promoted, and they're individuals who are experienced in the government agencies that they're employed by. And so that's how a lot of these mistakes are being made. It's just this indiscriminate firing of probationary federal workers.
And by the way, some of those federal workers, and a lot of them apparently, are Republicans, and certainly a ton of them are independent. And so now you're losing all the votes of all of their, not just them, but all their families. So this is a politically, and from both politically and from a policy perspective, clearly the wrong way to go about it. Even if you believe in Doge, this is the dumb way to do it.
Now, I want to give you one statement from a Republican that Reuters spoke to. His name is Gerald Dunn, and in regard to the cuts on federal employees, he says, he's just rushing a little bit. I think the whole thing with the Doge is being rushed a little bit. I like what he's doing, but I think a lot of what he says is just BS. When he starts talking about annexing Greenland and annexing Canada, that's just smoke. So, Gerald Dunn likes the idea of getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse. I like the idea of getting rid of waste, fraud, and abuse, and I have no qualms with anybody who says that exists. I think it does exist within the federal government. You just have to do a better review and have a better, method of rooting out where the waste is instead of indiscriminately firing probationary federal workers. All right, let's go to immigration now. So this is graphic 6, where you're gonna see how Americans are judging how Donald Trump has handled the issue of immigration. 55% of Americans are in favor of increasing the deportation of people who are in the United States illegally. Among Republicans, that number is 89%. Among Democrats, much lower at 24%, with 74% disapproving of that idea. And so this is really interesting because while the majority of Americans are in favor of increasing deportations, turns out that Americans are not happy with how Trump is carrying this out. So let's go to graphic 7 here, where across all respondents in the Reuters Ipsos poll, just over half, 55%, supported increasing deportations compared to 41% who were opposed. But Trump's performance on immigration was approved by less than half of respondents at 47%. So what do you think is happening there?
Yeah, so I don't think that the voters were unclear. They wanted to stop illegal immigration. So they said it in every poll, and it was one of the top 3 issues in every single poll. So they're still sticking with their position. But both on that issue and throughout all these issues, what you're seeing in the polling is, yeah, we asked you to do it, but we didn't ask you to do it in a maniacal way. We didn't ask you to do it in a super draconian way. We didn't ask you to take a hatchet to things that need a scalpel, right? We didn't ask you to cut everything. But we asked you to cut the things that are problematic. We asked you to control the border. We didn't ask you to drag people out of their houses, etc. Now they haven't done that much of it. They've gone after undocumented criminals so far, mainly. And so I'm a little bit surprised that how he's handling immigration is already a little bit unpopular. So, but that's the good news because it might provide the polling is good news because it might provide a break in the Trump administration. It might not, but they might look at it and go, oh wow, yeah, if we go further and we start going after people who are not criminals, this is gonna get really unpopular. So everybody always, well, that's not true. The Democrats, I was about to say everybody overreads their mandate. No, the Republicans overread their mandate. The Democrats underread their mandate.
Yeah, and look, I want to be clear, like Cenk is speculating. Like we don't know why the respondents to the Reuters poll are unhappy with how Donald Trump is carrying out the immigration policies, but I should note this. So a federal judge, and we're gonna do a longer story on this in just a minute, but a federal judge has just blocked Donald Trump's unlawful and harmful immigration raids at houses of worship. So early on in this administration, we heard from Tom Homan, who is Donald Trump's border czar, that they will in fact go into churches or places of worship if necessary in order to carry out deportations. But a federal judge has stepped in and said, no, that actually goes against religious liberty and constitutional protections for religious liberty in America. I'm unclear as to whether the Trump administration is going to appeal or challenge that decision by the federal judge. But nonetheless, I do think that most people in America get super uncomfortable when you start talking about ICE agents raiding places of worship in order to carry out deportations. Now, I want to juxtapose this Reuters Ipsos poll, which was pretty harsh toward Trump, to be honest. The respondents, at least, were harsher toward Trump. This Harvard-Harris poll is a little bit different because according to the Harvard-Harris poll, more than half of Americans are actually liking what they're seeing from the Trump administration so far. According to the survey of 2,443 registered voters, 52% of the electorate approves of Trump's performance in office thus far. Trump's approval rating is high among specific key constituencies that he actually struggled with in the past. And that includes independents, 45% of which approve of how Trump is handling his job so far. 47% of women approve, 50% of Hispanics, 47% of Asians, and 50% of suburbanites. Now, polling also shows that Trump's approval rating overall sits at 50%, starkly different than some Democrats. So Joe Biden was at 34%. Kamala Harris at 39%, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at 25%. I know she's real hot within the Democratic Party among Democratic voters, but in regard to her appeal for the rest of the country, she sits at 25%. And Chuck Schumer, shockingly, at 23%. And I only say shockingly because I think it should be much, much lower.
Yeah, so if you're wondering why Donald Trump is still popular in that poll, and remember with polls, they're directionally correct. They're not, always absolutely correct on the specifics. So other polls will have Trump at a little lower number. I haven't seen any at a higher number, but it's in that range, right? And the same thing on the policy issues. So if you look at it just as a range, you might be wondering why is it still so high for Trump, especially given all the numbers we gave you on the policies and how they're starting to sour on Doge and other things, right? The reason is because the American people are gracious. And they give presidents some decent leeway in the beginning of their terms. And especially because they just voted for them, right? And Trump won the popular vote. And he has the leeway of 52%, as I've told you many times, because it's one of the most interesting polls I've ever seen in my life. Barack Obama at about the same time in his first term had an approval rating of 83%. So almost the entire country was behind him, right? And then obviously that number went down as they normally do. And then Obama still left fairly popular. Trump doesn't have as much room to go down. But the more he does these unpopular things, the more he'll go down. And the more he doesn't address the number one thing he was elected for, inflation and the economy, the more the numbers will go down. I think Trump is an interesting cat. I think that when Bush went down, I said there was no way he was going to recover. He doesn't have the capacity to recover. When Biden went down in the last 2 years, I said he has no capacity to recover, and that was also true. With Trump, since he cares so much about being popular, and he turns around so quickly and so often, there is some chance he could go, oh, okay, I'm diving, I got to get back up. But that hasn't happened yet. So far, as a person, he's still holding while things are deteriorating underneath him.
Right, and so we'll see, again, whether the unpopularity that the American people have consistently communicated in regard to Elon Musk is gonna eventually, seep into Donald Trump's approval ratings. We're gonna see, but for now, it does appear that some Americans who voted for him or supported him in the beginning are now starting to question how he's performing in his role as president. We got to take a break. When we come back for the second hour, we're going to talk about that federal judge blocking the Trump administration as it pertains to immigration raids in places of worship. And then we're also going to talk about how the DOJ has launched an investigation into fraud that's been carried out allegedly by UnitedHealth. Fascinating story. Can't wait to share the details on that and more. Come right back.
Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Idarola. This is gonna be a big one.
Meanwhile, in the Arctic, you know where this is going. You watch the Damage Report, the Arctic's on fire. Obviously, why would we be talking about the Arctic except to tell you that it's melting once again? The Republicans aren't that interested in it. I wonder why. Lift out of poverty up to 3.7 million people, including an estimated 1.3 million children. Hashtag save the children? Not if it costs money. I mean, come on.
Ring the bell on YouTube today. You know what it does? It actually rings the bell at my house. It's super annoying, but if you do it, it just keeps on ringing. Oh, plus you can find out when the show is live and whenever we have new clips. Ring the bell. Oh no, not again.
How would I look walking a dog on the White House lawn? Would that be?
You know how much it costs you to start an account on tyt.com? Nothing. It's free. So you just go and register in about 2.5 seconds. Then you can chat with us during the show. We read those comments the most often. You chat with each other. Tons of people have become friends there. We're super interactive. We do a lot of polls for our paying members. We sometimes do polls that drive the direction of the show. So that's amazing. There's no other show that's this interactive. And our home base for that is tyt.com. Come join us right now.
When you were growing up, what did you want to be?
I think I was starting to think I don't want to do one thing, and I did live up to that.
Well, mission accomplished then, because Dave was a geologist, and now he's helped found the Young Turks. Even within TYT, you've done a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So if you want to do different things, you nailed it. All right, last story to end on is a Dave story. Whenever there was something like obvious, glaring, he would go up and ask them about it. Like it'd be like a giant church, right? And somebody standing in front of it. The usual Dave go, pull up right in front of him. Be like, hey, do you know where there's a church around here? And they're like, right here. It's right here.
Practical jokes. Spice up life a little.
We've been around for about 20 years and we have about 20 billion views. Am I proud of that? Hell yeah, I am. We put out 20 billion messages in a bottle. Have we helped to move now 2 generations, millennials and Gen Z, to become progressive? Yes, those numbers are real. We moved generations. Were we the only ones? Of course not. But we have been the largest online news show for now decades.
Hi, this is J.R. Jackson, host of The Young Turks. Sign up for an Apple subscription for $4.99 to listen to our show ad-free and get access to bonus content. Sign up when you search for the TYT channel on Apple Podcasts at apple.co/TYT.
Cool news, shoptyt.com now has books. There's a whole bunch of books there. You're gonna be shocked to find out that they're largely progressive. Of course! Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People, is there. It's a fantastic story from Jesse Jackson to Bernie Sanders to AOC that explains the progressive movement probably better than any book I've ever read. Speaking of awesome books, my dad's got a book out called The Original Young Turk, where he goes from the poorest olive farmer you ever met in your life to living the American dream.
Frack, frack, frack like a duck. Frack, frack, frack.
That's what I do.
TYT, Cenk Ana and Karam Ode. Karam, thanks for joining. They hit the join button below. You can do that as well. 2 months off an annual membership if you sign up through tyt.com, and subscribing and ringing the bell, all free on YouTube and all wonderful. We appreciate all you guys. Casper.
Well, there's a breaking news story about some of the legal challenges to Donald Trump and the Department of Homeland Security. So let's get into the details. A federal judge has blocked the Trump administration's move to essentially carry out immigration raids at places of worship, something that was announced early on in Trump's second term. In fact, a day after he was inaugurated, the Trump administration rescinded a Biden-era directive that prevented immigration enforcement in places of worship. However, there was a lawsuit filed by Democracy Forward in regard to that Department of Homeland Security guidance and announcement that they would be doing immigration raids at places of worship. And a federal judge has sided with the plaintiffs in this case. They're arguing that, look, allowing federal agents to indiscriminately target migrants is in violation of religious freedom and expression rights. And in this case, the judge agreed. So let's hear from Theodore Chang. That is the US District Judge who blocked DHS on this matter. Here's what he had to say in his decision. Armed law enforcement officers operating in or at places of worship pursuant to the 2025 policy will adversely affect the ability of Quakers and Sikhs to follow their religious beliefs or worship freely. He also argues that given that each of plaintiffs has religious beliefs that cause them to welcome and serve immigrants, has significant immigrant membership or operates in communities with significant immigrant populations, and has not disavowed that they will continue to serve immigrants both with and without legal status, it is reasonable to expect the Department of Homeland Security will direct immigration enforcement toward plaintiffs specifically. And so the judge added that although the plaintiffs each had different religious views, that didn't really matter in this case because all were in agreement that being welcoming to immigrants was a central part of their faith, central part of the practice of their faith.
Yeah, so I totally agree with this. And so I'm curious whether you were gonna think that my view is extreme. I think that even if they're have criminals in the church or religious building, that the cops should not go in. And so, look, I believe that we should not do mass deportations. I love when religious organizations protect immigrants that didn't do anything wrong. I do believe we should send criminal undocumented immigrants back, but. And I'm an atheist, so I've got no dog in that fight of between the religions and stuff. But I believe in the United States Constitution, and we protect religious freedom in these parts. And so if your religion says that you have to be welcoming to immigrants and you protect those immigrants, I think the government should have a thou shalt not pass at the door of the church, the temple, etc. And by the way, if you're a Christian, there is endless quotes in the Bible about Jesus and God being in favor of immigrants, often referred to as strangers. Like, I'll give you one, but there's so many. Deuteronomy 10:19 said, "You shall also love the stranger, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." So that is a core tenet of Christianity, let alone all the other religions. So, you could say, hey, yeah, but I don't agree with that in terms of policy here in America, no problem. But when religious leaders do want to protect people based on their religious faith and beliefs, we've got to let them do that here in America.
Yeah, look, I'm also not a believer in institutions of religion, right? Like anyway, but my point is that religious liberty is an important part of this country, and I deeply respect the religious people of faith in this country, and want to protect their ability to practice their faith. And so I think that this argument is a good argument to bring forward in regard to how what DHS is intending to do is wrong, because just think about what that would look like, right? You have places of worship being raided by ICE. That's going to interrupt the religious practices of everyone who's in that place of worship, right? And so to your point about someone who might be an undocumented immigrant who was suspected of committing terrible crimes, like violent crimes or things like that, I don't think you need to necessarily raid a place of worship in order to arrest them. I think ICE can either wait outside and arrest that individual after they have their religious practices, or whatever services done. invading and interrupting religious like church or whatever, it's just not the right way to go. I don't think it's a good way to go. So I don't know if the Trump administration is going to appeal this decision or challenge it, but notice how DHS also said that schools might be raided. This has nothing to do with the schools. They specifically block the order as it pertains to places of worship.
Yeah, so if you're on the side of protecting immigrants, don't get too excited. This is very specific, right? And then if you're on the side of deporting folks, and this is not going to play well, raiding churches and other houses of worship. So if I was on that side, I'd say tread carefully. But it doesn't look like they're treading carefully on anything. So if they start knocking down the doors, apparently as they have already to some degree, that's why they went to court, knocking down the doors of churches to get in, that is going to play awful with the American people.
Well, let's take another break. When we come back, we'll talk about how the Justice Department under Trump has launched an investigation into potential fraud by private insurers who are ripping off American taxpayers through the Medicare system. We've got that and more coming up. Don't miss it.
All right, back on TYT. So a couple of good super chats here. Joe Hiker asked a good question to me. Cenk, you used to have an ad where you called a caller racist for voting for Trump. What changed? And that's a fair question. And Anna and I had a little bit of a debate a couple of years back about this, so it's been going on for a while. And what changed is not that I think, oh, all the voters on Trump's side are angels. And in my book, I talk about the nuances of the voters versus the politicians and how the Republican voters are very wrong on some things, but also right on some things. And my book goes back about a year and a half or so, right? But basically, to the core of your question, I was overgeneralizing. I was making the same mistake that others, I think, are making right now, and that I'm now trying to correct, which is especially when Trump wins the popular vote in all the swing states, that means we lost enough of the middle that it's not fair to say that those voters all believe the most extreme things that Trump says. And as you see them peeling off now, as he does things that go too far, well, obviously, they don't all agree with Trump, or not just. And then remember, they had a binary choice. And voting for the establishment is gut-wrenching for a lot of people, including me. And so I only got there because the alternative was Trump, who said terminate the Constitution. So there's a lot of reluctant voters in there. So I came to a clear conclusion after this election, let alone the change that's been happening throughout as we see more and more of how diverse that base. And remember, and one last thing about that's important. In the past, and I've said this a couple of times, whenever I went on right-wing shows or talked to right-wingers, it was a monolith. And I stopped going on because it was a waste of time. There was no conversation. It was just yelling back and forth about talking points. That's because they almost all used to get their information from Fox News or talk radio, who had all the same talking points. Now when you go on right-wing shows, you'll still get a ton of things that anger you, a billion things you disagree with, but there's a lot of diversity of thought in there. And I know a lot of people on the left don't believe it, but the polls are showing it to you right in front of your eyes. Diversity of thought there. And so when you lose a popular vote and you see all those things happening, if you don't correct yourself, you're making a giant mistake, and I don't want to make that mistake. And I have no problem with saying I'm wrong when I'm wrong. I don't want to stay wrong. I want to get to a better position and learn as we go. So, but good question, brother, and very fair. Ryan L said, I can't express the catharsis I see with all these Trumpers turning while you're there with an olive branch. I've seen the plan since the beginning, but waiting for the apology tour from other lefties. You're probably gonna wait a long time for that. Even as they turn and realize that we've been right all along, they'll never come back and say we were right. They'll pretend that they came up with the idea, and you're starting to see that. We'll be back. Back on the Young Turks, Cenk Ana news.
All right, well, a story that we've been following very closely is the potential fraud that's being carried out by private insurers who have Medicare Advantage plans. And the Wall Street Journal has done some really great investigative reporting on this. And lately, they're reporting that the DOJ is looking into the issue. Let's get to it.
We've got potentially a predatory for-profit company gaming the system at this fat, bloated government agency that wouldn't know if it was getting stolen from if its life depended on this bloated Medicare system. What do you think at this point the fraud and waste at Medicare and Medicaid is, doctors, at 30%? I mean, this is why we have a problem.
Well, that problem is now being looked into by the Department of Justice, which has launched a civil investigation into UnitedHealth, with federal prosecutors accusing the private insurer of overcharging the Medicare system and ripping off American taxpayers. Now, the DOJ civil fraud investigation is looking into UnitedHealth's practice of recording diagnoses that trigger extra payments to its Medicare Advantage plans, which of course are privately run but publicly funded healthcare plans for this nation's elderly. And I can't wait to give you the details on it. But Cenk, do you think this is real? You think that Trump's DOJ is going to carry out this investigation?
So the Biden administration started it. They're continuing it for now. I'm crossing my fingers, but Pam Bondi has a certain history that I'm worried about. So we can get into that history, but first you should find out what they're doing, because for the moment being, it's fantastic.
For the moment being, it is fantastic. And the Wall Street Journal, which has been really focusing on this story, reported that as recently as January 31st, doctors and nurses who have been kind of caught up in this scandal have been interviewed by federal prosecutors about this. Now, let's get to some of the details. As I mentioned, when it comes to Medicare Advantage, that is a privately run but publicly funded Medicare plan. And there have been many stories accusing private insurers of engaging in fraud in order to make money off the Medicare system, which then rips off the American taxpayer. Insurers do get a lump sum payments from the federal government to oversee Medicare enrollees' benefits, but they get paid more for certain diagnoses, which incentivizes the practice of diagnosing patients with more diseases, even if they don't have said illnesses. So that's the accusation here. Now, in December, the Wall Street Journal found that patients examined by UnitedHealth employed doctors actually had a pretty huge increase in lucrative diagnoses after joining the company's Medicare Advantage plans. Doctors said UnitedHealth, based in the Minneapolis area, trained them to document revenue-generating diagnoses, including some they felt were obscure or irrelevant. The company also used software to suggest conditions and paid bonuses for considering the suggestions, among other tactics. And that's according to some of the doctors that the Wall Street Journal had interviewed for their reporting. Now, in addition to that, the journal's reporting found that UnitedHealth allegedly added diagnoses or conditions to patients' medical records without the patients even knowing about it and without the patients even receiving any treatment for these conditions. And the Wall Street Journal claims that alone triggered an extra $8.7 billion in federal payments in 2021 alone. So you want to talk about government waste, fraud, and abuse? These are the areas where I would like to see a lot more focus by the Trump administration. Again, this was an investigation that was launched under the Biden administration, but it appears that for now, the Trump DOJ is continuing with that investigation, and I hope they continue to do so. The untreated diagnoses, by the way, stem from sources including in-home visits by nurses working for the company's house calls unit. Each visit by the UnitedHealth employed nurses was worth an average of $2,735 in additional federal payments, a journal analysis of Medicare data spanning 2019 through 2021 found. And as a result, last month, Justice Department lawyers from the offices of the US Attorney for Minnesota and the Washington, D.C. based civil division spoke to at least 3 doctors. So this was on January 31st, and 1 nurse that the Wall Street Journal actually wrote about. So as an example, Valerie O'Meara, a nurse practitioner who worked for UnitedHealth in Washington state, said she was interviewed on January 31st by Justice Department attorneys who were interested in the company's software that suggested diagnoses and the role of a UnitedHealth manager who she said urged her to make new diagnoses beyond what doctors had treated. So super interested to see how this all really plays out. But just to give you a little more clarity, I want to go to this video featuring a Stanford professor. His name is Dr. Robert Pearl, and he kind of explains the distinctions in which the Medicare system is billed for certain diagnoses by private insurers like UnitedHealth, who have Medicare Advantage plans. Let's take a look.
You have to differentiate what you're calling billing codes, which is I see you in the office because you have a broken arm and I fix the broken arm and I bill for that, as opposed to the way that UnitedHealthcare is being paid by the federal government, which is what the allegations are about, which is specific to Medicare Advantage. There they get paid a set fee. We call it a capitation to take care of a patient. And it's based upon how risky, how likely it is the patient's gonna become sick. So if they're adding on diagnoses, but they haven't yet manifested in a medical problem, that's okay. If they're adding on diagnoses that didn't exist or exaggerating the diagnoses that do exist, that is not both improper and illegal.
Yeah, I think that incentive structure is insane. It's bananas. So essentially, the private insurer is predicting that this patient is going to develop some illness, and Medicare gets billed for that, even though we don't know if that patient is necessarily going to have that illness.
Yeah, no, this structure is wrong for sure. So they've got to fix, there's 2 different problems, guys. Fixing the structure and then fixing the fraud, the alleged fraud at UnitedHealth. So first I'm gonna go to a member, Vita Del Set at tyt.com said, Medicare Advantage is the charter school of medical insurance. And that's both a hilarious and poignant analogy.
Yep.
So nicely done. I love having the smartest audience. So now on the things that they build, the very specific one that Anna mentioned a little while ago, where the patients didn't know that they theoretically had this condition and did not receive treatment for that condition, and they billed it anyway, and that was $8.7 billion worth of what appears to be massive fraud.
In 1 year.
Yeah, and if they catch that and that is true and they prove it, this shouldn't be civil, it should be criminal. I mean, if you stole $87, you'd have trouble. $8,700, you'd have a lot of trouble. You steal $8.7 billion, I don't give a goddamn that you did it in a suit. And I don't care that you gave some of the proceeds to a bunch of corrupt politicians. Here, credit to Biden and Trump. Rare situation where that happens for this investigation. Let's hope that it gets to the end, and I'm not sure that it will. But there's no justification for it not being criminal to steal, especially at this level. And by the way, progressives would love it, MAGA would love it.
Yes.
Okay.
It's our money. It's
our money, and they're stealing it. Yes,
exactly.
And of course, the people who wouldn't love it generally are politicians who get bribed by these people. I mean, campaign contributions, which leads us to Pam Bondi. Now, she's running the Department of Justice now under Trump, and Pam Bondi has an unfortunate history, which I really, really hope she does not repeat here, which is she'll start an investigation, and then somebody that she started the investigation on, either a person or a company, will then send her a campaign contribution, and then she will end the investigation. So that does two things. One, it gives her the appearance of fighting for justice. Oh, I'm starting all these investigations, right? And two, it gives her a lot of campaign contributions. So she starts investigations over and over again, and as soon as she receives the contribution, she ends them. She did it with Trump, and that's how they got to know each other. She started an investigation of Trump University, and then he sent her a check, and then she immediately ended it. This was a long time ago, right?
Can you receive donations as the head of the DOJ, as Attorney General?
So no, that's a great question and point. No, in this case, she couldn't directly because she's not running for any office, it's not an elected office,
right,
et cetera. But they sent a giant check to Donald Trump, to the Republican Party, et cetera, et cetera. It's not like Pam Bondi's not going to hear that.
Right, of course.
Right, they're gonna call her and tell her the bribe is in the mail. So we're gonna need you to shut that down and say, oh, it was Biden and what a dummy, and oh my God, he's trying to punish poor American corporations who have America's best interests at heart and ruin the economy and drive up inflation, and we won't stand for that. We're gonna protect the average American by continuing to rob the average American.
Yeah.
So that's how it would go, but that has not happened yet. And so far, the Trump administration is continuing this investigation, so we give them credit for that now.
For now, yeah, they deserve credit for now. But let me just be clear: if they decide to back off this investigation of private insurers that are very likely defrauding the American taxpayer, then I'm sorry, they have no credibility in regard to their agenda in cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. Because you want to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, there is a lot of it impacting our Medicare system.
Yeah, and guys, and if they start misdirecting you, don't let them do that, because Medicare is great. It is intensely popular. The American people love it. This is Medicare Advantage, and it is private companies that are ripping off the average American, not the government.
Yeah.
And that is why I'm worried that they're gonna end the investigation, because usually when it's private companies ripping off the government, that's called politics. And so, unfortunately, in America, where bribery is basically legalized. So they finish this and they do a massive penalty on these guys, or in my dream of dreams, lock up a couple of guys. I'm gonna give them all the credit in the world, but we're all gonna see what they do with our own eyes.
All right, let's do one more story before we get to our last break. And this one's a heavy story, so buckle up.
It's a first since 2002. Israeli tanks deployed in the occupied West Bank as part of an extensive military operation launched on January the 21st. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the operation, dubbed Iron Wall, aims to, quote, defeat terrorism. The fighting is taking a heavy toll on the local population. According to the UN, some 40,000 people from several refugee camps have fled their homes.
2 days after the Gaza ceasefire deal went into effect, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the right-wing Israeli government turned their focus and attention to the West Bank. And now, for the first time in decades, since 2002, tanks have been deployed to Jenin and other refugee camps to essentially drive Palestinians out. And I want to be clear, that is the whole objective here. They're not even trying to hide it. So Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz said he and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered the military to increase the intensity of the activity to thwart terrorism in all refugee camps in the West Bank. Now there has, to be fair, there's been an increase in Palestinian attacks coming from the West Bank. So for instance, on Thursday, 3 empty buses exploded in Israel in what police say was an attempted militant attack. However, let's also be clear in noting that since the war began in Gaza after October 7th, there has been a lot of violence toward Palestinian civilians by Israeli settlers in the West Bank. And so this has been going on, since the beginning of the war. More than 800 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank since the war in Gaza erupted on October 7th. Israel says most were militants, but stone-throwing youths protesting Israeli raids, as well as bystanders, have also been killed, including, by the way, an American citizen that we reported on last year. In the most recent operation, a pregnant Palestinian woman was killed. Kind of hard to argue that she's a militant. Now, this weekend, the Israeli military also admitted its forces had killed 2 13-year-old kids and that it was investigating the incidents.
Sure, they'll get right on it.
Jenin's mayor says that Israel's military had also razed at least 120 residential buildings and caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. Now, let's actually get to the veil being lifted. They're flat out telling the truth here. Now, Israel Katz is outright admitting that they intended to go beyond just killing people. They plan to ethnically cleanse the territory as well. He says, quote, "We will not allow the return of residents and we will not allow terrorism to return and grow." Earlier, Katz said he had instructed the military to prepare for an extended stay in some of the West Bank's urban refugee camps, from which about 40,000 Palestinians have fled, leaving them emptied of residents. And I just want to also note that he says that Israeli troops would stay for the coming year. In addition to that, Dropsite News is reporting that Israeli Deputy Knesset Speaker Nassim Vaturi, who's part of the Likud party, told radio station Kol Barama that all Palestinian men in Gaza should be wiped out. He says the following, and I'm quoting, "Who is innocent in Gaza? Civilians went out and slaughtered people in cold blood. We need to separate the children and women and kill the adults in Gaza. We are being too considerate." He also says we will soon turn to Jenin, or we will soon turn Jenin into Gaza. He said, adding that the Palestinian captives released under the Gaza ceasefire deal should be sent there so they can be eliminated by Israeli forces. Erase Jenin, don't start looking for the terrorists. If there's a terrorist in a house, take it out.
Yeah, because if you start looking for the terrorists, you run into Nassim Vaturi, who is clearly a terrorist. We're sending money to an Israeli government filled with terrorists. Ben Gvir is a terrorist. This guy's obviously is celebrating terrorism. He's saying we should murder the citizens. That is the definition of terrorism. And in Israel, that's not remarkable. The idea of killing innocent Palestinians seems to be widely accepted. No problem at all. There are tons of cabinet ministers constantly talking about killing them all, ethnically cleansing them, moving them out, driving them into the desert, etc. And they're still in government. We're sending money to a terrorist government. So look, let's talk about the different things that Israel has done to violate the ceasefire in Gaza, because that's the second part of the story. So they did not remove themselves from the Philadelphia corridor. That was one of the parts of the agreement. So they were supposed to, and when I saw that, I was like, really? They're gonna leave some of the land that they're occupying in Gaza? I'd be very surprised by that. Well, and of course, I was right. They're not gonna leave any of the land. The whole point is to steal land. It was never about self-defense. That's been a giant lie and a use of propaganda by Israel. Calling dead children collateral damage is propaganda by Israel. It's a vicious form of terrorism that Israel does, that they not only kill the children, but then they smear them later as like, oh, well, they were near terrorists, so they were collateral damage. I was moral in the way that I slaughtered them. No, you weren't. You were despicably immoral. So they did not leave the land, of course. Number two, they were supposed to negotiate the second part of the ceasefire and a permanent truce. Netanyahu did not send a single negotiator and had never had any intention of negotiating for a long-term peace. Exactly what we told you on the show, because he's not interested in favor in peace. He's interested in war, colonial expansion, land acquisition, and land theft. And he's slaughtering more innocent Palestinians because he is one of the worst terrorists of our lifetimes. Okay, now number 3, the prisoner swap. That's supposed to be the heart of the agreement here. The Hamas returns the hostages, and Israel's supposed to return what they call prisoners, but an overwhelming majority of them are just hostages because they do these giant roundups. They don't even charge them with any crimes. And then they go, if you want your hostages back, the ones that we humiliated and took away their freedom and destroy their lives.
Or raped in some cases.
And some of them raped. Well, then you're gonna have to give me some hostages back or whatever else that I want. I hate hostage taking on either side. It's super easy for me to condemn what Hamas has done. And let's talk about the Bibas family. So that's the 2 young kids who were killed by Hamas. They're returning the bodies. They're pretending to return the body of their mom. It turns out it's not their mom. So that's a violation of the ceasefire from Hamas's side. And the way that they paraded them around in front of the crowds, the coffins, was disgusting. By the way, the idiots in Hamas every time I see what they do, I think, God, you are so monumentally stupid. So everything they do makes it harder to get a Palestinian state. So do you think the world is ready to have enormous sympathy for the Palestinians, and does? And these morons in Hamas come and ruin that sympathy by acting in the most barbaric and immoral way. So easy for me to condemn them. Now I'm gonna ask, for those of you who are Israeli supporters, do you do likewise for Israel? Do you condemn the 14,500 children that Israel has slaughtered? Or do you make nonsense excuses about, well, there's just collateral damage. They were just human shields. Hamas had it coming, the Palestinians had it coming. They agree with Hamas anyway. Well, you agree with your government. Does this justify slaughtering your children? No, it doesn't. And it doesn't justify slaughtering Palestinian children. 14,500 kids is not a mistake. That is done on purpose to terrorize the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank so that they'll leave their land and Israel can steal it, which is exactly what's happening now. Finally, if you say, well, I mean, Palestinian children, they really count? Because a lot of the Israeli propagandists, including in American media, will say, well, they all agreed with terrorism, they voted for terrorism, so what? Because Israeli children are the most God-given, beautiful creatures on earth. By the way, they are, like all children, okay? But when it comes to Palestinian children, who cares? Slaughter, slaughter. Remember, bombs hit, concrete drops on a baby's head and crushes its skull. A bomb hits and lights the baby on fire. Israel has done that over 14,000 times. The worst kind of terrorism I've seen in my lifetime. And if you're still not convinced by that, 808 babies have been killed so far by Israel. Oh, collateral damage, right? So to me, those Israeli babies matter and the Palestinian babies matter. If the Palestinian babies don't matter to you, you lost your moral bearings at some point. So do not support the terrorist government of Israel, and every dollar that goes to them is America aiding and abetting that terrorism. I vote no on not a single more dollar to support killing babies.
Major shakeup at MSNBC. We'll give you all the details on that and more when we come back.
All right, back. So let's go to TYT.com. Hypocritus Noah writes, in the richest country in the world can't afford Medicare for all its citizens or pass an audit of the Pentagon, but still the richest country. And so the point there is a good one, which is it's not like we don't have enough money to be able to audit the Pentagon and make sure we get it right, to be able to afford Medicare, et cetera. No, the rich that are the donor class are taking all the money and redistributing it to the top. And then going, oh, we ran out of money after I got it all. And look, one of the things that I made a big deal about, so Anna was out that day, I presented this story, were the Democratic donors that are not only scared and running away and not funding anymore, but the ones that said, well, it turns out Trump was a better return on investment, and they've now flipped to Trump. Because that donor class doesn't give a goddamn about us. It's all me. So some on the left will be like, oh, I like black people and gay people, but oh, Trump's getting me better tax cuts than Biden. I'm going to Trump. Okay, so these are the people who robbed us blind. Trillions and trillions of dollars redistributed to the top. Trump's not gonna address it. He's gonna make it worse. So that anger is gonna grow. The people in Washington, including Trump, are playing with not just fire, they're playing with dynamite. The American people are furious, and it's only gonna get worse until we get someone who actually represents them. Gary Donahue said, we had UnitedHealth Medicare Advantage for the last 5 years. Both my wife and I underwent surgeries during this time, and each time we were forced to have nurses visit our home afterwards. They would often come unannounced or without our consent.
Oh no.
It was obvious to us that we were being used to milk Medicare.
Hell no.
And my parents, they have Medicare Advantage. I got a call because I take their calls. Hey, we're gonna send a nurse. And I was like, no, you're not, no. My parents can go to the doctor. They don't need your scam nurse coming in here to rob them and every other taxpayer. They've been doing this for years. Everybody knows this is a robbery. Everyone in Washington knows it's a robbery.
Yep.
And it's taking a million years to fix it. And if it's fixed at the end, it'll be shocking. Okay, Gary also wrote in, sometimes I feel that Cenk is just reminding people to be adults. Some of us failed our children. Thanks for trying, Cenk. Well, thank you. By the way, get caught trying. ShopTYT.com. I love that merch. The Team Joy ones, get caught trying stuff. Anyway, but Gary, thank you, brother. Salt of the Union says, everyone keep Jorby in your thoughts and prayers, referring to Jordan Ewell. He had his girl stolen by a hatless fraud this weekend.
Oh my God, I almost had a heart attack. I'm like, what happened?
Me too.
What happened to Jordan?
No, Jordan got married over the weekend. It was a beautiful wedding, gorgeous. But they're kidding because he didn't wear a hat at the wedding, so it must not have been him. Sexy Speed Racer said Jasmine Crockett for president or for vice president on a ticket with Nina Turner at the top. I'm not sure Jasmine Crockett and Nina Turner would agree, but if they do agree, well, that would be interesting. Art Guy says, if Musk does actually substantially cut the Pentagon budget, will that make all these other cuts worth the pain? No, but remember, Art Guy, we were never going to get the things that we wanted from the Republican side. Like, oh, I'm going to get 90% of what I would just love anything that was positive as they're doing all these negative things that we're fighting back against. And 10% positive doesn't outweigh 90% negative, but it's a lot better than 0% positive. But as it turns out, they're not doing that either. All right, and I am out of time. Okay, we'll be back in a minute. Back on TYT, Cenk Ana, Susan Blackburn, and Gemini Sun. Thanks for joining, guys. We really appreciate it. Anna.
We got to talk about what's happening over at MSNBC. Let's get to it.
Joy Reid was fired by MSNBC. There's lots of other ways to phrase this, and I'm sure they will dress this up to some degree. This is contributing to the entirety of the Trump racism enveloping this country, and it is part of a stampede to see which formerly liberal company can get to the head of the racism line, the approved racism line, as fast as possible. And Joy Reid getting removed from the primetime lineup of MSNBC is MSNBC's biggest contribution yet.
Joy Reid has been fired from MSNBC. And Keith Olbermann thinks that race has something to do with it, even though she will be replaced with 2 Black hosts and a Latina host. So I don't think it's about racism.
Yeah, well, for some people who've lost their minds like Keith Olbermann, everything's about racism.
Yeah.
So although there is one thing that Joy Reid did that was positive, that might have actually been the issue. We'll get to that in a sec.
Now, before we get to that, I should also note that Keith Olbermann is now pointing fingers at other MSNBC hosts and essentially demanding that they step down for Joy Reid's sake, and that includes Rachel Maddow, Lawrence O'Donnell, and Chris Hayes. Let's go to his post where he says, "Dear Maddow, if you go on the air tonight, or at a minimum go on without condemning the overt racism of the people who give you $25 million a year, you are complicit. Same for you, Lawrence O'Donnell and Chris Hayes. Protest or you are all Joe Scarborough." Now, of course, it goes without saying, Keith Olbermann used to be a host at MSNBC before he too was fired from his position. But let's get to the details here because, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, real quick on one thing there. Nice lib on lib crime there because, unfortunately some version of liberal Democrats say racism about everything. And so Rachel Maddow normally does that, but now Olbermann is flipping it on Rachel Maddow and say you better say racism, even though it makes no sense in this context. Otherwise, you don't deserve that salary or whatever. To be fair to Keith Olbermann, Rachel Maddow has that job purely because of Keith Olbermann. So as much as I dislike Keith Olbermann, I'm always fair, and he absolutely made sure that she got that job.
I hate all these people. Okay, let's just move on. Okay, right. So who will Joy Reid be replaced with? Simone Townsend Sanders, former Bernie Sanders press secretary. She was also an advisor to both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Alicia Menendez, that's actually Bob Menendez's daughter, but yeah, that's all I have about her. She also hosts a show on MSNBC. And then you have Michael Steele, former Republican and also former chair of the Republican National Committee. So all Uniparty. Yes, so all three of them actually had been hosting a different show on MSNBC called The Weekend. The Weekend will now have three new hosts, and these three individuals will be hosting a panel show in the hour where Joy Reid's show is currently airing. Her last episode will take place this week. Now, we have criticized Joy Reid plenty on this show for making statements like this.
And I think it's important to say that, anyone who has experienced or been in the United States for any period of time and experienced this country's history and knows it cannot have believed that it would be easy to elect a woman president, let alone a woman of color. Let's just be clear. And nothing that was true yesterday about how flawlessly this campaign was run is not true now. I mean, this really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. She had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swift. She had the Swifties. She had the Beehive. Like, you could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time. And I think that's still true.
So look, I gotta say, her election analysis was awful. What she had to say in spreading weird conspiracy theories after the first assassination attempt against Donald Trump, I thought that was awful. But we are the fairest show, and there were some examples of her doing commentary that I thought was actually pretty courageous, considering the monotonous mainstream media narrative that's always pro-Israel while hiding the suffering of the Palestinian people. Joy Reid did excellent commentary on that issue, and I want to give you an example.
You can't judge every Palestinian or every Muslim or every Arab based on what Hamas did any more than you could have judged every American by the fact that some Americans elected a religious extremist backed wannabe autocrat. Being for Palestinians' freedom and staying alive does not mean you love Hamas or support them. The Hamas attack killed an estimated 1,400 people, including children, according to Israeli authorities. And as of tonight, the death toll in Gaza has topped 8,000 since October 7th, including 3,400 children, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. President Biden may say he doesn't believe Palestinians when they say how many of them have been killed. But reporting by news organizations like the AP, Reuters, the BBC, and our own reporters on the ground make it clear that the numbers of dead and the devastation in Gaza are staggering. The US is warning Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to rein in extremist settlers in the occupied West Bank in the wake of reports of violence against Palestinians there. And given these bombings are being done using our tax dollars, perhaps we should ask some questions. For example, how does bombing a densely populated land strip filled 50% with children constitute self-defense?
MSNBC has now gotten rid of pretty much every host that has dared to speak out in favor of protecting Palestinian civilian lives. The other person who just got fired, what's the name of
Alex
that host?
Wagner. And she didn't get fired. She is still a contributor, but she used to be at 9 o'clock in Rachel's spot Tuesday through Thursday, and they took her
That's
off.
not who I was referring to, though. Ayman
Mohyeldin, no, he wasn't fired. He actually got a little bit more time or better time slot, and so did Ali Velshi. So they did their, look, we don't know exactly why they made these moves, okay?
Are you talking about what happened today? Because there was an update today. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so look, they take Joy Reid out, she's African American, they put in 2 African Americans and Latina. So they took out everyone in prime time who had said something positive about Palestinians. But on the weekends, they gave those 2 Muslim American hosts a little bit extra time or better time slot. So they're covering their bases on all the identity politics stuff. So look, there's so many components to this. Number one, again, we don't know if they did it because of their position on Palestine, but it is, here we go again. You're in favor of Palestinians prime time, you're gone. But back to the main core here, they're just going more establishment. They're bringing in Jen Psaki at 9 o'clock Tuesday through Friday. Jen Psaki, literally the mouthpiece for the Biden administration. Earlier in the lineup is Nicole Wallace, literally the mouthpiece for the Bush administration. So what we have here is uniparty extraordinaire. And I think it's a terrible strategy on top of everything else. So MSNBC and CNN are gonna split up the establishment viewers, all 12 of them, they all live in Washington. It's an awful strategy. And all they're trying to do is check off each box for the powerful. Oh, this lobby wants that, this party wants that, this part of the establishment wants this. Yes, but what do the viewers want? So I don't really care anymore because now television's nearly dead and these guys' ability to move Democratic voters is greatly diminished. They were a giant propaganda machine that cost progressives and populists in every primary. They will never give populists a fair shake at MSNBC. Press describing Joy Reid as a progressive is absurd. So no one was more pro-establishment than Joy Reid. But as much as I disagreed with Joy Reid, I'm also not in the camp of celebrating her tears, which some people are doing because she cried on a show about it. That is very understandable. And it's a moment like this where you show dignity and grace. Because what are you beating up on her for? She's not in power anymore. Doesn't have that show anymore. So when you criticize people in power, it's for a purpose. But now that she's not there anymore, let it go, guys. So no need to beat up on her at all anymore. And then of course, lastly, Trump is threatening to shut down MSNBC and wants them to pay him a bribe or whatever the hell he thinks he's doing with demanding money from media organizations that criticize him. So of all the people that are wrong here, Trump found a way to be even more wrong than all of the rest of them. So this is not gonna help MSNBC. They're gonna be just as anti-progressive, anti-populist as they have always been, even more so. And they will take this train all the way off that cliff because they have no ability to recover. They don't know anyone who's in the regular population, any real voters. They're an insular little bubble of establishment folks who are patting themselves on the back, but this thing's almost over already. It's just rearranging chairs on the Titanic. All right, in the bonus episode, we have more amazing stories for you guys. Oh my God, the Democrats doing the same thing they did before, including some of their donors complaining. But wait, were they this part of the problem? The Biden team is back and saying Biden would have won. So check out all of that. If you're a member, hit the join button on YouTube to become a member or tyt.com/join if you're watching anywhere else. And we'll see you all in a minute.